Hi, this is Billie Jean King.
This is Marion Bartoli.
This is Bianca Andreescu.
I'm Mats Wilander.
This is Mary Carrillo.
This is Pam Schreiber.
This is Yannick Noah, and you're listening to the Tennis Podcast.
Well, hello and welcome to the Tennis Podcast, your special extra bonus midweek tennis podcast, because apparently tennis tournaments finish midweek now. So tennis asks a question, we respond. David is here. This is David's favourite time of day. It's pre 9 a.m. Hello, David.
Yeah, and it's extra podcast day as well. That was also my idea. Everything's coming up me today. If you'd been on last night's Coaches and Coaching show for Friends, you'd have seen Catherine at her very best. And I'd have been flailing around trying to keep up in my sort of I need to go to bed face. But no, I'm on fine form this morning.
David and I have a window of about 2 hours a day where we're both on okay form at the same time. Matt Roberts is here, fresh at any time of day. Matt Roberts, hello.
Although I have to say, the inside truth is that Catherine was the one pushing for this to be earlier. It was suggested for about 9:30, and then up pops Catherine in WhatsApp 8:45, and I almost fell off my chair.
Well, because if we went for 9:30, yes, by 10:30, 10:45, Billie Jean would be angsting for a walk and potentially making the sort of noises in the background that she was making throughout that Friends show last night, which were somewhat distracting. So actually, the truth is that if we recorded at 9:30, I would probably have to get up early enough to give her a walk beforehand, which would be an ungodly hour of the day for me. The sort of time that David gets up every day. Luckily for this extra bonus show, we have tennis has provided excellent material to talk about. Let's start in Beijing with the ATP final there between Carlos Alcaraz and Jannik Sinner, won by Alcaraz in the deciding set tiebreak, 6-7, 6-4, 7-6, coming from 3-love down in that deciding set tiebreak. David, their matches already, these two, have so much pressure on them to be good, don't they? Because they are the anointed rivalry. So many matches in the past have been good, although their two prime matches this year haven't been that great, let's be honest. They've been those kind of matches where they haven't played well at the same time. It felt like this one really needed to be good, or we'd have been starting to wonder whether their rivalry was overhyped or something, and it delivered, and their rivalry is categorically not overhyped.
No, not crap, but elements of crapness in a couple of the matches that we were really hoping for rivalry bliss, and I think that this one needed to be particularly good because the stakes weren't as high. This was not a Grand Slam semi or final. This was not a Masters 1000 or an ATP Finals final or a Davis Cup final. It was a 500 final. Very, very good final and tournament in Beijing, which has the associated related 1000 on the WTA side. But on the ATP side, this was about matches and players, and that's what both this and the Tokyo tournament are really about, particularly for players of this level. And I think what you actually got, what we ended up getting, was if somebody who didn't know that much about tennis wanted to know, well, what's the big deal about Alcaraz against Sinner? You could just send them this match. They don't need to watch any of the others. They could just watch this one. Because I think that this match summed up the two players to perfection. I thought there was a really good bit of commentary from Naomi Brody on the World Feed when she said the match was like Jannik Sinner at 8.5, 9 out of 10 for 3.5 hours, and Carlos Alcaraz at 10 out of 10 for some periods of it, and 7 out of 10 for other periods of it. And that's kind of what you get with these two. I did think that Alcaraz was going to win easily, when he went 4-1 up in the first set, and he's been in blistering form for the last couple of weeks, including the Laver Cup. The perfect combination of power and variety and just excitement. He really is that puppy of a player who just can't believe how exciting everything is and racing after every ball. I did find one of the comments from Roger Federer about him at Laver Cup quite revealing, quite funny, when he said, he really does need to know that there are some balls you don't actually have to chase. And I thought, yeah, he still hasn't got that memo. Will he ever? I don't know. But generally speaking, he's just got that balance right these days. And yet it wasn't the straightforward win that I thought it was going to be in the end. And in fact, he could very well have lost. And I think that is partly still a bit of a failing on his side. And I'm not sure whether it's possible maybe it's just not possible to maintain the sort of level that is required to win easily against a player like Jannik Sinner, who's playing quite well himself. But I also think it says a lot about Sinner that he just doesn't ask too much of himself. He has this brilliant level which he asks questions with, and it ended up making for a fantastic 3.5 hours that I watched with my wife. She likes tennis, but she's not that bothered. But she loved this, and we were both just sat there enthralled.
It felt to me like Carlos Alcaraz was the better player for more of it than Jannik Sinner was. Maybe that's just because you remember the spectacular more than you remember the ordinary. I'm quite sure that's a factor. And yet I ended up being surprised that Alcaraz won because he wasn't winning the big points. I felt like he was just about winning more points, but he wasn't winning the big ones. He was letting opportunities go. And usually that ends up costing you, ultimately. I had the feeling that that was going to end up being the story of the match. And how he wrenched control of it from 3-love down in that tiebreak, Matt, was unreal. Talk about a surge.
The most incredible purple patch that he may have ever hit, and that is saying quite something, because he's had lots of those in his short but brilliant career already. And he had to change his shoes, didn't he, right at the start of that tiebreak, because it was one of those where he was going for a ball that he couldn't get, and he ruined his shoes, so he had to change them, and he then comes back, he's 3-love down, and he said afterwards that he was aware of Jannik Sinner's tiebreak record. Sinner had only lost, I think, one of his last 18 or 19 tiebreaks, an extraordinary record, including, of course, in the first set where, as you say, Catherine, I thought Alcaraz was the better player in that first set, mostly. He was the one doing the gasp-inducing shots, he was playing on his terms, he was aggressive, the speed of the court was rewarding his variety, and yet it was Sinner who ended up winning the set with that incredible return to save set point in the tiebreak. And just felt like we'd seen that set before in Federer-Djokovic rivalries, where one guy is just doing the sort of tennis that makes you think he's absolutely unstoppable, and then it's like, oh, he hasn't even won the set because the other guy is just so steely and so good in the big moments. And suddenly we find ourselves in this final set tiebreak, and I'm thinking, well, the same thing's going to happen again. Alcaraz has dazzled through the set, come up with some impossibly good tennis, which Sinner has lived with, taken it to a tiebreak, and Sinner in the big moment is going to probably win this. But no, the points that Alcaraz put together from 3-love down to win 7 in a row, extraordinary. And so daring, so there was a drop shot in there. There was a serve volley from not the baseline, but not the service line. Mid-court, he volleyed it and came in. It was just instinctive shot that I don't think anyone else would play. And that's the beauty of Alcaraz, because he always says that what he would regret is not going for it. There are some players who would regret giving it away. I think that's probably Sinner's mantra. Sinner doesn't want to give it away. He doesn't want to give cheap, unforced errors. It's the Djokovic playbook for so many years. Alcaraz is not quite like that. He wants to go for it on his terms. and he did that in those final 7 points. And that's the standard you have to reach to win a tiebreak against Jannik Sinner at the moment. It was an incredible surge, and I agree with you. I think easily their best match since the 2022 US Open, which might remain untouched in their rivalry as maybe their best ever match. That was just extraordinary for 5 hours. This had more ups and downs. There were some points where, there was quite a lot of cheap, unforced errors at times, but by the end, it just felt like they were hitting you over the head with incredible shot after incredible shot. It was absolutely electrifying. And I don't know, I find it hard to ignore the greater context of the sport at the moment. Like, it felt like there was a premium on this because who knows? Like, we might not get Sinner-Alcaraz matches for a year or two if the WADA appeal comes through. Like, it felt like a moment to really relish this rivalry and this match that we're getting now, because look, the next year is uncertain at this point, but what we do know is that right now those two are matchup wise, I think, the best in men's tennis, and it was just an absolute treat to see them play a final like that.
Gosh, what a thought, Matt. I think that maybe this is sort of hypotheticals that we don't want to do yet. We don't even have a timescale for the WADA appeal. But I think it would be devastating to Alcaraz if Jannik Sinner were taken out of the equation and that rivalry were removed from his career for that time. I think he loves it, and he's a guy that needs to love what he's doing in order to play well. I don't know. I think that would be devastating for Alcaraz, David.
It certainly bothered John McEnroe when Bjorn Borg retired at 26 at the peak of both of their careers. And McEnroe just getting they retired with their rivalry at 7-7, and they never played again. And we think of that as one of the all-time great rivalries. Yet they only played each other 14 times, and it ripped such meaning out of John McEnroe's life. I think, as a tennis player. Yes, he went and dominated, and I think that, frankly, that is what I would expect would happen. I already think that Carlos Alcaraz could win 12 in a row. I still think so, even though he's got to go back to zero again and start all over again. But, if Jannik Sinner wasn't around, I do think dominance could happen. But I also think, it is possible he could have a bit of a funk if he didn't get to have the excitement of a match like this. There's a long way a lot that would need to happen, and Jannik Sinner hasn't faced that situation yet, but we know it is a possibility now.
That is all three matches that they've played this year won by Carlos Alcaraz, who now leads that head-to-head 6-4, I think, whereas it was led by Jannik Sinner 4-3 ahead of prior to this year. All three matches quite different. Jannik Sinner struggling a bit physically in Indian Wells. The French Open match just really patchy, and Alcaraz kind of the heavy favourite for that one, given the surface, or certainly the favourite in a way that he wouldn't be on other surfaces in that matchup, I think. And now this one incredibly tight and could have been won by Jannik Sinner. But the fact is that he's 0-3 against his biggest rival for this year. Is that a problem for Jannik Sinner, Matt?
A little bit. I think he did seem to have an advantage over a lot of the other players in the world, that he'd figured out Alcaraz. He was able to beat him reliably and consistently in a way that a lot of other players weren't. What I find interesting about all the matches is that Alcaraz has come from a set down in all of them. I completely agree. They've all been different, but that has been something that has kind of united them all, is that Alcaraz certainly in the first two, had a very slow start. He didn't have a slow start at all yesterday. He was incredibly quick out the blocks, but did end up losing that first set, as we've described. And yet he's still gone on to win them all. So that does strike me that that's a bit of a problem for Sinner. You know, I don't know off the top of my head Sinner's conversion rate from a set up, but I imagine it's extremely good. And yet all three times that he's faced Alcaraz this year, even winning the first set hasn't been enough. So that suggests to me that Alcaraz has really figured something out in this rivalry. I was struck by how much more on Alcaraz's terms this match was than some of their ones in the past. You know, I've often thought of Sinner as being able to kind of neutralise the Alcaraz fun a little bit. You know, turn it into a really back and forth hitting contest, and Sinner's so good at that. But Alcaraz was able to use all the aspects of his game yesterday, coming to the net so often, taking the ball early, drop shots, not loads, but using them at the right time, and just generally it looked like the best of Alcaraz rather than, it kind of looked a bit like Sinner hanging on to me rather than in the past where sometimes it's felt like Alcaraz is kind of hanging on against Sinner. So it's definitely significant, I think. And kind of when we look at the year as a whole, you know, they've both won 2 slams. Obviously, Alcaraz has got the silver medal as well, where Sinner couldn't play the Olympics. But I think Sinner's going to end the year as number 1. But it kind of feels to me like their head-to-head is a little bit of a tie-break in this. And I think right now, given obviously the WADA appeal hanging over Sinner, and also given the head-to-head, it feels like Alcaraz has got the better vibes right now out of the two, even though it does feel like Sinner is probably going to end the year as world number 1. I think I would rather be in Alcaraz's shoes right now.
Could you name me a point in time when anyone has had better vibes than Carlos Alcaraz? Who is that person?
Novak Djokovic having won Olympic gold.
Yeah.
Yes. Oh gosh, have you seen him in Shanghai? He's still wearing that medal.
Is he really?
Yeah. He's wearing a bright green tracksuit and his Olympic medal, and good luck to him. So long as there's not a gold tennis bag involved when he walks on court. Wear the medal all you like, mate. Yeah, he's really, I like that he's still basking in that glow. It is still giving me slight kind of, I've summited the great mountain, what now vibes, you know, yeah.
It is one of the great fascinations, isn't it, as to what Novak Djokovic does next. I think he often is that, but maybe more so now than, I don't want to say ever, because this is a guy who was disqualified from the US Open and deported from Australia, and finding out what he did after those two was always going to be fascinating. But yeah, following Olympic gold, when Alcaraz is doing what he's doing and Sinner's doing what he's doing, albeit now with huge question marks over his future, yeah, Australia for Djokovic will be just particularly tantalising.
Australia probably ranked outside the world's top 10, certainly ranked outside the world's top 5. You know, he's going to be facing the big guns. If he gets to the latter stages, he's going to be facing them early. It looks like we're going to have Jannik Sinner and Carlos Alcaraz as the top seeds. Zverev did briefly leapfrog into number 2 in the world. He's been pushed down now to number 3 by Alcaraz. There's not much in it, but Zverev's been suffering with pneumonia, hasn't he? And Alcaraz obviously in great form. I mean, what we need is Sinner playing Alcaraz in the Australian Open final with the career slam on the line for Carlos Alcaraz. Is it too much to ask, folks? Is it too much to ask? Because they haven't, they've played a fair bit in their young rivalry, but they haven't played many finals. This was only their second ever final, Matt?
Yes, after Umag, which was, you know, tucked in that post-Wimbledon period a couple of years ago that I think only the diehards really saw. And it does feel like the the next stage is for them to meet in a Grand Slam final. Exactly. Like they've split the slams this year. They've never played in a Grand Slam final, and yeah, the career slam is on the line for Carlos Alcaraz in Australia. Like if Sinner wins the French Open next year, like he'll be going into Wimbledon, going for the career slam. Like we're in that territory with them already. Like they're both that good. But yeah, as I said, there is obviously the Wilder appeal that we have to think about. But I don't want to have to think about that because I just want so many years of the Sinner Alcaraz rivalry. It just feels like we're on the brink of, well, it is already very special, but we're on the brink of something incredible, I think, between these two.
We could do with knowing a timeline for that, couldn't we? So we know sort of just what we're dealing with in terms of, like, when do we need to start really thinking and worrying about it? Like, because it feels like it could be a year, or it could be a couple of months away. I think a year is more likely than a couple of months. The wheels do seem to grind very slowly on these things with WADA, but the not knowing, obviously kind of worse for Jannik Sinner. But for the tennis world, that uncertainty and that cloud is just, it just sucks.
And I think we have to factor that in to what we were saying earlier about the head-to-head between these two this year. You know, like, obviously Sinner has had incredible results while all this has been hanging over him. But you have to also think it probably has taken some toll and had some effect on him. Like, let's hope that he doesn't get banned and he's able to, you know, carry on his career without all this hanging over him. You would think he would get better after this. Like, you would think that maybe some of the results he's had this year have been affected by what's been going on, which sounds like a ludicrous thing to say because he's just won the US Open. He was on a 14 or 15 match winning streak. Like, he seemed to be doing fine. But it's the matches against Alcaraz where, you know, the very small margins are going to be shown up, aren't they? And if he's a bit freer and calmer and just in a better place mentally, like, maybe that would help him in these big matches against Alcaraz going forward. So I think we have to factor that in when we're talking about Sinner's results this year, that there's just been this giant thing on his mind the whole time.
Certainly can't hurt, can it, not having the threat of a doping ban hanging over you.
You saw that at the US Open when he was able to talk about it and not be hiding it anymore. And then he goes and wins the US Open. So obviously, subsequently, he's had another thing come on his plate. So I mean, there is a small bit of evidence there, right there.
Mm. Okay, well, that is the Beijing ATP event dealt with. The Beijing WTA event is ongoing. We'll talk about some of what we've seen there in the last few days, and we're going to talk about the Tokyo final. All of that coming up in part 2. Welcome back to part 2 of the tennis podcast, where Zheng Shuai is hanging in. She's trying to perform another comeback against Paula Badosa. I'm going to try and not be too distracted by that in part 2, though we are going to talk about Zheng Shuai and what we've seen in the last few days in the WTA event in Beijing, which reaches its conclusion over this weekend. First, though, David, you have sat through the hors d'oeuvre, the appetizer of Alcaraz Sinner. Now you get the main course of Artifice somehow winning the title in Tokyo, saving match point in the second set tiebreak to beat Ugo Humbert 5-7, 7-6, 6-3. Absolute scenes for Artifice in Tokyo, and I imagine in the law living room.
You imagine right. Because I mean, I think the last time we were talking on Monday, he'd obviously had a great run, and he'd already beaten Taylor Fritz, albeit I suspect, a slightly compromised Taylor Fritz post-Laver Cup. Then he beat Matteo Berrettini from a set down, and then there was a retirement. So again, slightly compromised, but I don't feel like that tells the story of how well Artifice was playing, and he subsequently backed all that up by beating Holger Rune. Gets to this final, and he's up against a guy in Hugo Humbert who'd won all three of their matches, and he'd only ever won one set. The most recent he'd lost 6-2, 6-2. So this guy's a problem for Fils, I think, stylistically, and also they're clearly close. They're clearly he seems to get on with everybody. Artifice, he's one of those. But particularly with all the French players, there's a real bond, and I think in previous matches, they've been able to take advantage of that. I think they've been able to take advantage of the fact that they know where to go against Artifice. He's another prodigiously athletic and powerful and talented guy who's got weaknesses, who's over the start of this year in particular had glaring weaknesses. If you extended a rally beyond 6 shots, he would break down. He would hit long. He would hit into the net. His returns in were some of the lowest in the top 50. He was right in the bottom 2 or 3 in the top 50 of returns in. And he sort of stopped working with Sergio Bruguera and just went alone with Sébastien Grosjean and some of the other French Federation people there. But Grosjean, I think in particular, you can feel the impact he's had and how much more sort of abbreviated the forehand of Fils has become. It was this massive wind-up shot. He's got this very high ball toss, which I think is prone to be affected by conditions, and therefore indoors is perfect for him because it doesn't affect him. But the security of his game has come on leaps and bounds, and yet he hasn't lost that ability to explode on you. And against Humbert, he was clearly physically compromised, Fils. You mentioned it in the matches you were watching, Catherine, that at the end he looked like he could barely stand up. He was cramping, and the idea that he would be able to produce the next match seemed kind of far-fetched. And even in this match, he has a very competitive opening set, which he loses, and he looks out on his feet. He's having medical timeouts. He's having attention to his ankles and his feet, and just looking like the body is completely cramping and seizing up on him. And Humbert is a tough customer, left-handed, short takebacks, uses your power against you, deflects everything. And so all Fils could do was kind of go for broke and hang in. But even then, the idea that he would turn this around seemed absurd, and including going match point down. And I think that does show you that there's real heart in him, there's real fighting spirit. He dug in there somewhere, and he's one of these. He's a bit like Alcaraz, who described the tiebreak against Sinner when he was 3-love down. He said, I had to sort of keep it close enough so that I could then go for it. You can't go for it all the time on every shot. You just can't. You've sometimes got to find a way to keep it close enough so that adrenaline takes over. And that's what Fils managed to do. He managed to keep interested long enough so that then adrenaline comes in and he kind of forgets the aches and pains. And then he goes for it, and he took over. Same time, I know Hugo Humbert has this incredible final record, but I also watched every single ball, believe me, of him against Brandon Nakashima at Wimbledon because I was commentating on it, and he gets tight when it's really big in his mind. You can feel him get tight, and a player who's free hitting. I mean, on match point, for instance, when he had match point, he did approach the net, but it was kind of sort of, I'm keeping the ball in and coming to the net. Please miss. Please miss. And Fils didn't miss. He hit a backhand winner down the line to save match point. And you just get two different players. I think it's one of the beauties of sport generally is how do you function under pressure when you're really tense? And Fils kind of was able to come from behind and not feel any of that because he was basically already done. He was out. He'd lost. And yet he hadn't lost, and I think it's he's still one of these players who will have an amazing week like this, and he had it when he beat Zverev in Hamburg, and then not win a match for 4 weeks. If he can sort that out, I mean, he's already 21 in the world. I think he's just gone ahead of Felix Auger-Aliassime and overtaken him to 21 in the world. If he could sort that out next year, there's so many events where he lost first round last year in big events that he could make major inroads in the rankings.
Well, look, I think it would be forgivable for him to not have a great tournament in Shanghai. I think that turnaround is pretty crazy for anybody that went deep in Beijing or Tokyo, especially as most of the players that went deep in Beijing or Tokyo have come out in, I can't remember whether it's top or bottom of the draw, and they've been scheduled to play first. I know some of them have a bye in the first round, but still, there is, there's a tricky turnaround there for a lot of players.
Sinner and Alcaraz have been given an extra day. Did you see that? Have
they? Have they? Well, good. Some common sense. So I think that would be forgivable, but there's obviously there's Paris around the corner, isn't there? And he's going to come into that kind of with, I would guess, more spotlight than he's ever had before. And I think he's now at the stage of his career where he needs to be handling that and having a good tournament in Paris. In the live rankings, David, he is 18 in the world, 1 spot behind Jack Draper. Draper is pulled out of Shanghai, nursing this abdominal injury, which I don't think sounds really bad, but it's obviously, something he's nervous about and just wants to make absolutely sure not to aggravate it and make it anything worse for the longer term. I'm going to hit you with a cruel question here, David, because they're next to one another in the live rankings. Or rather, the live race. I think it's the race I'm looking at, L race. But anyway, they're bedfellows in some forms of the rankings, having had very different years. I think Jack Draper with that one big standout Grand Slam result. Artifice having had he's won a 500 title, not done anything particularly groundbreaking at slams. But here they find themselves. Who of them is going to have the better 2025?
It's a great question. I think I would say Fils, because I trust his body more to stand up to the rigours of tour life year round. I haven't seen him get injured lots and break down at an early age the way Draper has, and even now Draper's pulled a stomach muscle and is nigh on shutting down his season, which I think is sensible, and I think he's made strides. But I think it would be down to that, because I think Fils has sorted out his main weaknesses technically. I still think there's room for improvement with him, no question about it. And I do think it was fascinating at the start of this year the way he played what is it called, the Golden Swing, the South American clay court tournaments, which I was really excited to see him in, because I like watching him on clay. And I think he won 1 match in 3 tournaments. It was terrible. That's when he was struggling with this technique issue, or certainly the lack of consistency. I can't believe that is going to continue indefinitely. I think he's likely to find some consistency more, and he's got, like I said, I think there were first rounds in sort of Miami, Indian Wells, Cincinnati, couple of the Grand Slams, Australian Open, French Open. He just didn't win matches at any of these tournaments. So he's got a lot of upside there, and he's also got a hugely high ceiling of ability, which I think is actually probably higher than Draper's. Personally, I mean, I think Draper's left-handedness is a big weapon for him. I do think, when you talk to other players, they often cite a player's left-handedness as reason for their ceiling to be higher. Other players, but no, I would say Fils is going to have the better year of the two. What would you two say?
Shocking that David has gone down the Artifice hype road. Matt, for balance, what do you think?
Well, I got a reputation during the US Open for pouring a lot of cold water on the Jack Draper hype, and I'm going to do the same again and say that I agree with David and think that Fils, certainly if we're talking about next year, I think David makes a great point about, I trust Fis's physicality a bit more. I'm also really struck by the way Jack Draper spoke in his press conference at the US Open about how much he is still getting to grips with kind of that on-court anxiety that he feels and that kind of nervousness. Like, I think he can, with time, and with experience, and with a lot of work that I'm sure he's doing, I think he will get better at dealing with that. But Fils hasn't got any of that problem. In fact, he absolutely relishes the stage and the moment, and I think that's why, it's one of the reasons why David is sort of so drawn to him. You just know that he can rise to an occasion. He can play his best tennis in some really big moments, and as David said, explode on you, and all of those qualities, I think, suggest to me that this has been a really important year for him, figuring out his technique, and I just think he's going to have a moment. I think he's going to have a big run at some point next year, on top of a bit more consistency as well. Like, I really do think that's possible for Fils. He strikes me as a threat on kind of any surface. I still think the forehand take back is big, and I still think he can be rushed on that side, less than maybe at the start of the year, but that would be a little worry for me. But you don't play that much on really fast surfaces, so it's not going to be too exposed. So I think I would lean Fils as well for those reasons.
If I rephrase the question to, they're both guaranteed to be fit all season, David, would your answer still be the same?
No, I think they'd be right alongside each other, because I think Draper's got a great work ethic, and he's got a really problematic game for a lot of people. I think he can beat quite a lot of people relatively straightforwardly, which I don't think Fils has necessarily got. I don't think, it's that what are your patterns to win points game. I'm not entirely sure what Fils is yet in quite the same way as I am with Draper. I know exactly how Draper's going to win most of his points against most players. So I think you're still more likely to get Fils early round losses more than you are with Draper. But yeah, I think they'd be side by side. I think they'd be both 10 or 11 in the world in a year's time, if they both stayed fit.
Exciting. Very well could happen. I'm really excited to see Fils in Paris. And that is me desperately looking for reasons to get excited about Paris, because I do find that event quite challenging. But Fils in Paris is definitely a reason to be moderately excited. Let's move on to talk about the women's event in Beijing, where the run of Zheng Shuai has devastatingly just come to an end, but remains an incredible story. So Paula Badosa moving through to the semi-finals, having just beaten Zheng Shuai. Zheng Shuai beat Magdalena Freck in the intervening period since our last podcast. So the run did continue before being curtailed. So our quarter-final lineup, Mukova against Sabalenka, Andreeva against Zheng Qinwen, Starodubtseva, Yulia Starodubtseva, the Ukrainian qualifier, against Coco Gauff, and it was Zheng Shuai against Paula Badosa, but Badosa just moving through to the semi-finals with Starodubtseva and Gauff to come next on the main stadium court in Beijing. Just before we move on to look ahead to those quarterfinals, a look back, I think, is necessary on Gauff against Osaka, because that was the match that we were salivating over on Monday. And periods of it were great and justified the saliva, but ultimately ended up disappointingly with Naomi Osaka, who on reflection, had clearly been struggling physically throughout, having to retire after losing the second set. We now know that she had some stiffness in her back, which she'd started feeling on the practice court ahead of time. And it, even though this match did end up happening finally, we've still I still have come away with a what might have been feeling about it, Matt.
Oh, big time. I had a really weird feeling watching this whole thing, just because, honestly, I could tell straight away that something was up with Osaka. She had this look of resignation on her face right at the start. In literally the very first game of the match, she was almost looking at her team and kind of laughing, as though she was sort of embarking on some kind of slightly pointless venture, because she knew that, as we later found out, she'd locked her back up in practice. And seeing that uneasy look on her face straight away just gave me a slightly uneasy feeling watching the whole thing. I did feel at any moment that she might be about to retire, because she wasn't sitting down comfortably at the change of ends. She clearly wasn't running out properly to the side. So I just was constantly on edge for thinking that this match is going to be stopped at any potential moment. That being said, like, Osaka was, in shocking news, hitting the ball really well. And despite the back issue, it looked like she might actually somehow win the match in 2 sets. She was certainly, on track to do that before Goff mounted that comeback. But I don't know. I find it tough to read into too much for either player, really, because it was just such a compromised match. And I'm left feeling like, yes, as you say, we finally got Osaka Goff, but we didn't really, because, it clearly wasn't a fit Naomi Osaka, and therefore we didn't properly get to see the best of Coco Gauff either. It was just a really unfortunate occasion, and I just hope that Osaka's injury isn't too bad. She was suggesting that it wasn't, because I think she's meant to play twice in Japan still this season. There's a couple of events, and I think she's meant to play both of them. So that would obviously be big for her and for Japan, and I hope that can happen.
We mentioned on Monday, obviously, Coco Gauff working with this new coach, Matt Daly, who's a bit of a mysterious figure. He's not one of the usual names that features on the coaching carousel. Everybody's been sort of furiously looking up his CV and his website, and we understand that he has this focus on grip changes. What evidence do we see of technical change in Coco Gauff's game? David, any insights?
It's an interesting one, isn't it? Because I don't feel qualified to give a real assessment of it in the way that, if we were speaking to Pam, for instance, she would have things that she would see that I just wouldn't see, or she would see them certainly with more of a reliable eye. But just through my eye, it did look more secure. I did feel like she looked more confident in the trade of ground strokes on that side. And I mean, look, it's a very small sample size. I think sometimes maybe I'm looking for it, because I know that's she's with a new coach who apparently has a new grip focus, and maybe that's happened, and therefore if she hits 3 good forehands in a row, I'm thinking, oh, look what's happened, when actually she used to hit 3 good forehands in a row in the past. It felt to me like it was more reliable. That was how it came across, and I do actually think, whilst it was a really compromised match, you do have 2 players who are embarking on a similar thing with a completely different way of going about it. One has gone for the showiest coach imaginable, who everybody knows about, because how could you not? And the other one's gone for somebody that nobody really knows much about, and maybe is focusing on a very specific technical element. And I find them really interesting case studies for us to follow over the next probably 6 months. I think you've definitely got to give these sort of relationships that sort of time. So that probably takes you through the first 3 Grand Slams of the year, more or less, I think, to get a proper idea. Or certainly up until the clay court season, if you want to factor in the Sunshine double following the Australian Open. I think we'll get a sense of how things are going for them both after that.
It was interesting when Goff announced that Matt Daly was her new coach. She said that it's much more the serve that they're going to be working on, and it was the serve that was such a problem at the US Open with all those double faults against Navarro. I felt like she was kind of committing to the forehand more. Like she was sort of. It didn't look that different to me, honestly, but it looked like she was committing and just maybe committing to her whole game a little bit more in Beijing so far, rather than the sort of rut that she's been in for a few months. But I think it's the serve where we need to really sort of hone in on and see if there's going to be a big difference in the Goff game over the next few months as she works with this new coach. Okay, well, we will watch intently. Her next match against Yulia Starodubtseva is coming up momentarily in China, so I feel like lest it likely go out of date, I should offload my Yulia Starodubtseva research right now. It feels like now is the moment because well, she's reached the last 8 of a 1,000 event in her first 1,000 event, which isn't something that's been done an awful lot before. She's one of those like, wow, she's 24 and I've only just heard of her. Where's she been? Players. Well, the answer is she went to college. She went to Old Dominion University, which is in Virginia, I think. Only turned pro in last year. Last year was essentially her first year on tour. Graduated from Old Dominion in 2022. Which is interesting as a Ukrainian player. I've been reading this article about her on the WTA website. Her whole career as a professional tennis player has been during the period of war in Ukraine. She said, I came on tour basically at the time that Ukraine was invaded by Russia. And obviously that's terrible. Those are absolutely catastrophic, traumatic circumstances to be living any kind of life. But equally, she talks about the camaraderie that she's experienced with the Ukrainian players as a result of that. I do often think about how daunting it must be for players to come on tour. It must be like, walking into a school lunch hall as the new kid where everybody's already in their friendship groups, and to kind of have that ready-made community and camaraderie. It must be a very powerful thing, and she certainly talked about it as having been a powerful thing for her since she came on tour. She was coached as a child by Angelina Kalinina's grandmother. There you go.
Love it.
And they're still in touch, apparently.
And they're very much still in touch. Yes. So what happens when Angelina Kalinina plays Yulia Starodubtseva? I don't know. Is it a Tony Nadal type, I don't want my player to win situation? Who knows? But there you go. She's going to make her top 100 debut next week off the back of this run. I think the first player to qualify for all 4 Grand Slams in the same season. I watched a bit of her playing Victoria Azarenka in one of the early rounds of the US Open. She didn't end up winning that much, but I was very impressed with her. She has a real security on her strokes, I felt like. And
I think that is an extraordinary feat, qualifying for all 4 slams in 1 year. As you say, first woman to do that in the Open era, and, we've watched a fair bit of Grand Slam qualifying. That is an intense scenario, where she should have won 12 matches there under those circumstances, where everyone is fighting for their lives, fighting for maybe some of their biggest paychecks that they've ever had. And she's come through on different surfaces, different, she's shown that she can compete at that level. That's pretty impressive. I think she only ended up winning one one main draw match at the Slams. I think that was at Wimbledon. But, that's kind of 13 wins at the Slams this year, if you include all those ones in qualifying. So that's quite something in itself. And I honestly haven't seen a lot of her play, but that fact kind of tells me that there's a player and a kind of fighter there. And I'm intrigued to see how she can do now against Goff.
March last year, her friends set up a GoFundMe to help her just get out on tour and try to get some points and get on the ladder. $25,000 was raised, which was enough for her and her coach to start a career, basically. Which is a reminder of how different tennis is for players that don't come from a nation for whatever reason. Obviously, the war in Ukraine is a massive factor here, but for whatever reason don't have a huge infrastructure, financial and physical, to support young players. Setting up a GoFundMe just to be able to even try to be a professional tennis player. So it's an incredible 18 months that she has had, and I'm not saying she's necessarily going to be a Grand Slam contender. I haven't seen enough of her for that, but she's definitely somebody that we're going to be talking about more in 2025, I think. And yes, she might be 24, but in tennis years she's brand new, and that's exciting. So there you go. There is what I've got to say about Yulia Starodubtseva, who by the time you listen to this might already have lost to Coco Gauff. Just in terms of the other players in the quarterfinals, Mukova against Sabalenka, feed it into my veins. I as much as I enjoyed that US Open final, Pegula and Sabalenka, it was great. I still did have a feeling in my stomach of being denied Mukova Sabalenka, which I was just salivating at the prospect of. I've done a lot of salivating in this podcast, haven't I? And now we're going to get it, David. And I've got incredibly high hopes for this because they're both in incredible form. Obviously, Sabalenka on a winning streak, just, the best hardcourt player in the world. But Mukova has been taking players apart for the past week or so.
And she can do it in several ways. She's dissecting them. She's using variety. She's got power. She can hurt you, and she can finish you with shots that can kind of embarrass you as well. I think. I mean, I don't think players should feel embarrassed by it because she's that good. But I think it is one of the matches I could be most excited about the prospect of in tennis today, Mukova against Sabalenka, because the contrast of styles is so dramatic. The biggest, most ferocious hitting tennis player in Sabalenka, who just wants to destroy with every ball, against somebody who's just going to find different ways to try to turn that power back on her. And I just hope that they both find their form at the same time, because I think it could be as good as anything that you can get. I mean, I suppose what I'm asking for more than anything is just what we always ask for with Karolina Mukova, which is stay fit. Stay fit for the next 5 years, because it's not too late. So often you see a player recover from serious injuries, and she's had many, and including particularly wrist injuries, be somewhere short of what they once were. And that doesn't feel like it is the case right now. It feels like Mukova's playing the best tennis of her career. And I'm tuning into every one of her matches, no matter when it's on, no matter who it's against. She's in that little group. I think I'm going to have to come up with a new list of players I'll watch against whomever, whenever, and I'll set my alarm in the middle of the night to watch, and she's on it. It's a short list, her and Artifice and Carlos Alcaraz. There's one or two others, but what a player. And Sabalenka still hasn't lost since, before the US Open? So, yeah, it'll probably be an absolute dud now, but I can't wait.
That'll be tomorrow. So we've got 2 quarterfinals today, 2 2 tomorrow. Then obviously semis and finals. And we'll be back with a podcast on Monday to talk about all of that and to talk about the first few rounds of the ATP 1000 in Shanghai that we'll have seen. Obviously, the top seeds get a bye there, so we won't have seen anything huge in Shanghai, but there'll be plenty to talk about because tennis. And folks, I mentioned earlier in the show about the Friends show, or I actually think David mentioned it, the Friends show that we recorded last night with Pam Shriver as a special guest on the subject of coaching. And it was just so fascinating, wasn't it, for us, and we hope for listeners as well. Certainly seemed to get a good reception in the live chat. We were live on YouTube. It's available as a podcast. It's available to watch back on YouTube for friends of the Tennis Podcast. And if you would like to become a friend of the Tennis Podcast and get access to that and our whole back catalogue of bonus episodes, as well as everything that we have to come, and we still have a lot of Friends bonus content to come for 2024, and of course big plans for 2025, then the link to become a friend is in our show notes. And Pam was on brilliant form as ever, and it is such a treat that she just pops up on our shows and gives the most candid and fascinating insight. So we are very lucky, and we hope that friends of the pod enjoyed that. We'll be back on Monday. Of course, we have a mascot for this episode. That mascot, excuse me. We have 2 mascots for this episode. We have Archie and Maxie, owned by Edwina. Archie is the ginger cat in the incredible photo that I'm looking at right now, and Maxie is the grey cat. It's pressing all of my animals being friends buttons right here, because unless this photo is deeply misleading, they look like they are, very close friends, because Archie is either hugging Maxie in Juan Carlos Ferrero, Carlos Alcaraz fashion, or trying to throttle Maxie. But I'm going to choose to believe that it's a Juan Carlos Ferrero style hug, because Edwina tells us they're a bonded pair adopted from the RSPCA as kittens. They're now 2 years old, and much like Billie Jean, they don't understand when I watch tennis in the middle of the night, and they like to sit in front of the TV or the laptop because I'm not paying attention to them. That is a very familiar description, Edwina. They're absolutely lovely, and they do look like firm friends, and that's delightful. So thank you, Edwina, for Archie and Maxie. I'll be popping them on our Instagram. They'll be going in our newsletter, and it's a joy to have them. So thank you. Hello to our mascots, of course, the dearly departed Darwin, Francis, and Haida and Soma. You are our stalwarts of 2024, and we're very grateful. Hello to Billie Jean King and Alana Kloss, who sponsor Billie Jean, who my plan has worked. She's been silent throughout this podcast. And hello to our top folks and executive producers, Greg, Chris, Jamie, and Jeff. Over to you, Matt, for some shout-outs.
And we start with Carol Hooper in Kent.
Hi, Carol.
Hello, Carol.
And Carol actually says that she filled in her shout-out form while sitting on Armstrong waiting for Jack Draper.
Oh, and presumably waiting for a match that Jack Draper ended up winning.
I was going to say, I hope it wasn't Draper Mahatch.
Well, if she was a Jack Draper fan, which it sounds like she is, then she'd have loved that.
I don't
Better
know.
than the puke match.
I think it might have been the match.
I think
Draper
it would have had
played
to be
another match
Draper
on
Mahatch.
Armstrong. Oh, I'm sorry,
Well,
Carol.
let's go. Carol, I hope you enjoyed it.
Tennis carols. I'm struggling.
Come on, there are tennis carols.
Carol Zhao, the Canadian.
That's a Billie Jean King Cup name, isn't it, Matt?
Yep.
Good work, Matt.
There must be some tennis carols from the past.
Mary Carrillo and Pam Shriver shouting at their earphones right now.
We need to get one here because otherwise we're going to get some angry messages. Nope, Carol Zhao it is.
That'll do for
Matt,
me.
You've done fantastically there. Any hoopers? No. Carol, you are unique. And we hope you enjoyed Jack Draper beating the shadow of Thomas Mahatch. Thank you.
We've also got Peter in Tennessee.
All right, Peter.
Hello, Peter.
And Peter has 2 dogs, Wrigley and Winston. And Peter says they always wake when I join the 3 of you saying aloud, your one-stop shop for the Australian Open.
Oh. Like a kind of Pavlovian call to action for the canine world. Love that. Wrigley and
Winston.
Great names. And
Peter Fleming, Peter McNamara. We've got lots of tennis Peters. Yeah.
As he was known to Greg Rosetsky and Greg Rosetsky only.
Yeah. Much to Pete's absolute fury.
And finally, we've got Chloe Williams, who would like to give her shout out to Rachel Gilly.
Oh.
Rachel and Chloe met when, like Matt, that's me, we studied languages at Durham.
Whoa!
Oh.
Amazing.
Do you know them?
I don't.
Okay.
Chloe is from Suffolk and Rachel is from Nottingham but lives in Paris. And Rachel was a volunteer at the Olympic tennis at Roland Garros this year, working in player transport. So I bet she has some great stories.
Yeah.
I think transport gets good stories because you'd get the drivers' stories, and the drivers hear everything.
They sure do.
Love that, Rachel.
Well,
Guys.
Chloe Paquet, we can go there.
Rachel McQuillan. I don't know where I know that name from. I think I've said that before, but I know it's tennis related.
Very well done, David. And Chloe Paquet, what a shout.
And Chloe and Rachel are going to the ATP event in Vienna together in October, which is...
Oh my gosh.
lovely.
Dominic Thiem's last ever event.
Oh.
Brace yourselves, Chloe and Rachel. Yeah, emotional. Well, depends where you're going, isn't it? Unless you're going on the first day, you won't see Dominic Thiem, I presume. But enjoy. Probably best if you don't. Too sad. Except it's not sad because he's not sad. I'm the only one that's sad. Anyway, Chloe, Rachel, thank you. That is a lovely thing to do, Chloe. Thank you to all of our shout-out friends. If you'd like to get yourself a shout-out or an intro, you can do that at any time by becoming a friend of the Tennis Podcast. As I say, the link to do that is in our show notes. Thanks for listening to this bonus midweek pod. We'll be back on Monday and we'll speak to you then.